At 73, George Strait remains one of the most beloved and respected figures in country music, a man whose voice helped define an entire era. Known as the King of Country, Strait built a career that few artists could ever hope to match: 60 #1 hits, sold-out stadiums, millions of devoted fans, and the rare ability to stay humble despite unimaginable success. To generations, he is the symbol of traditional country values: strength, quiet determination, loyalty, and family. But behind the cowboy hat, the calm smile, and the timeless music lies a story far more heartbreaking than most fans realize. George Strait has lived through tragedies that would have destroyed other people. He has endured unimaginable loss, deep emotional wounds, and personal pain that never truly healed, even as he stood under bright lights performing songs that moved the world. And now, at 73, with the future of his music career uncertain and the weight of years pressing heavily on him, fans are beginning to understand just how much George has carried in silence. His journey is not just one of fame, it is one of resilience, heartbreak, and quiet suffering. From the devastating loss of his daughter, to years of grief he never fully spoke about, to the physical and emotional toll of a lifetime on the road, this is the tragic story of a man who gave everything to music while privately fighting battles most never knew he faced. This is the tragedy of George Strait. Long before George Strait wore the crown of the King of Country Music, he was a small-town Texas boy shaped by family, discipline, and hardship. Born in Poteet and raised in Pearsall, George grew up working on ranches, baling hay, mending fences, and living a life defined by long days and tough love. His parents divorced when he was still a teenager, a painful fracture that left deep emotional marks on him. George and his brother stayed with their father, while his mother moved away, a separation that quietly affected him for years. Despite the challenges, George found stability in music. He first fell in love with the guitar as a high schooler, though he never imagined it could become a career. Instead, like many young men in Texas, he joined the military in 1971. It was during his service that he discovered country music's power to soothe loneliness. He formed a band called Rambling Country and found an escape in performing. But even then, George was haunted by uncertainty, unsure of his future, unsure of his talents, unsure whether music would ever amount to anything more than weekend gigs. When he returned home, he struggled to break into the music scene. Nashville rejected him repeatedly. Record labels told him his sound was too traditional, and that he needed to reinvent himself. George refused. He worked ranch jobs, attended college classes, performed late-night bar gigs, and tried to support his growing family while chasing a dream everyone said was impossible. Through all these early struggles, George remained grounded by his wife Norma, his childhood sweetheart. She stood by him through rejection after rejection, recognizing the quiet determination inside him even when he doubted himself. Their bond was strong, but life was not easy. Money was tight. Opportunities were limited. And the pressure of balancing work, family, and an unforgiving industry weighed heavily on him. But even in these early years, before the world knew his name, tragedy had already touched George Strait's life. The emotional wounds from his fractured childhood and the uphill battle to build a stable future silently shaped the man he would become, a man who would later face heartbreak on a scale few could imagine. When George Strait finally broke through in the early 1980s, it felt like a miracle after years of rejection. His debut single, Unwound, exploded onto radio, and suddenly the shy Texas ranch kid with the clean-cut look and calm voice became one of country music's most promising stars. As album after album climbed the charts, fans fell in love with his authenticity. He didn't chase trends, didn't rely on controversial gimmicks, and didn't pretend to be anyone else. George Strait was simply George Strait. And it worked. But as the spotlight grew brighter, so did the pressure. Touring became endless, interviews felt overwhelming, and being away from home for months at a time strained his family more than he ever admitted publicly. Still, he pushed forward, determined to give his wife and children a stable, comfortable life, something he himself rarely felt growing up. Then, in 1986, tragedy struck in a way that forever changed him. His 13-year-old daughter, Jennifer Strait, was killed in a car accident. The loss shattered George and Norma to their core. No parent is prepared to bury a child, especially one so young, so full of life, so deeply loved. The grief was suffocating. Overnight, the joyful rising star of country music became a father struggling to make sense of unimaginable pain. George withdrew from the public eye emotionally. He stopped giving many interviews, avoided discussing his personal life, and poured everything he had left into music. But even on stage, performing for thousands, he carried the heavy shadow of grief. Fans noticed he sang with more depth, more emotion, because the heartbreak was real. Every song about loss, love, or longing had a piece of Jennifer woven into it, even if he never spoke her name. Offstage, George focused on protecting his family's privacy. He and Norma created the Jennifer Lynn Strait Foundation to honor their daughter quietly, without publicity or attention. It was their way of keeping her memory alive while shielding themselves from the world's curiosity. Still, the emotional toll was immense. Many around him said George changed after the tragedy. He became quieter, more reserved, more guarded. The pain never disappeared, he simply learned to live with it. That deep sorrow, coupled with the grueling demands of fame, created an internal conflict. The world wanted George Strait the superstar, but inside he was just a grieving father trying to hold himself together. As his career skyrocketed through the 90s, with hit after hit and sold-out tours, fans had no idea that every success came with a hidden ache. George rarely spoke about the tragedy, not because he didn't feel it, but because the wound never truly healed. The man who seemed strong, steady, and unshakable was quietly carrying one of the heaviest heartbreaks imaginable. And while the world celebrated him, George Strait was beginning to understand that fame could bring opportunity, but it could never erase pain. As George Strait entered the 1990s and early 2000s, he seemed unstoppable. Album after album went platinum, and radio embraced every single he released. He broke records without even trying. While other country artists chased trends, George stayed rooted in tradition, and fans loved him all the more for it. But behind the calm exterior, he was carrying a silent burden that fame only made heavier. The loss of his daughter had fundamentally reshaped him. Even as the industry flocked to him with awards, invitations, and contracts, George found himself withdrawing further into privacy. He no longer did long talk show circuits. He avoided personal questions. He never used his grief to gain sympathy or publicity. Instead, he tucked it away, holding the pain close to his chest. Many insiders say this emotional retreat wasn't about avoiding the media, it was about protecting his family, and protecting himself. Yet the world continued to demand more from him. Non-stop touring meant long nights, endless travel, and very little rest. George often admitted that life on the road could be lonely, exhausting, and isolating. Even with thousands of fans cheering in front of him, the moment he stepped off stage, the silence was deafening. He would return to hotel rooms knowing that the brightest parts of his life, his daughter, his family, his quiet time, were far behind him for the night. The emotional weight only increased in 2009 when George faced another devastating blow. His brother, Buddy Strait, died unexpectedly. Losing a sibling reopened wounds he had spent decades trying to keep buried. The grief was compounded by the relentless pace of his career, and once again, George retreated inward. He didn't make dramatic statements or public declarations, he simply carried the heartbreak in silence, as he always had. Meanwhile, the music industry was changing fast. Younger artists dominated headlines, trends shifted, and pressure mounted for veterans to adapt. But George refused to compromise his sound. That integrity kept him respected, but it also meant every album was a fight to prove he still mattered. Even after 60 #1 hits, George lived with a constant fear of disappointing his fans or fading into irrelevance. It didn't help that the physical toll of performing was beginning to show. Hours of standing on stage, long periods of travel, and demanding schedules became harder with age. His back, knees, and voice all endured years of strain. The emotional and physical exhaustion forced him to confront a painful truth: continuing at full speed could cost him what little peace he had left. In 2012, after decades of touring, George made the difficult decision to retire from full-scale tours. While he promised to do occasional shows, stepping back from the road felt like closing a chapter that had defined most of his life. Fans celebrated his legacy, but privately, George struggled. Touring had been his escape, his therapy, and a way to honor Jennifer's memory. Letting go of it meant confronting the grief and loneliness he had often outrun. And as he approached his 70s, the weight of everything he had endured, loss, heartbreak, expectations, and aging, began pressing down harder than ever. George Strait remains a towering icon in country music, a legend whose achievements may never be matched. Yet behind his calm, steady presence is a man facing the one struggle no level of fame or success can protect him from: time. Aging has forced George to confront memories, regrets, and losses he spent decades burying beneath the music. While he still performs selectively, the rhythm of his life has changed. The long tours are gone. The bright spotlight dims more often now. The cowboy who once roamed stadium stages with effortless strength now moves more carefully, aware that the years have taken a toll on his body. The stamina he once relied on is no longer guaranteed. Even simple travel requires more rest, more preparation, more caution. For a man who spent more than 40 years living on the road, slowing down hasn't been easy, it has been emotionally painful. What makes it even harder is the quiet. The silence brought on by fewer shows gives George more time to think, and that introspection has stirred up memories he once drowned out with work. He has spoken about how deeply he still feels the loss of his daughter, Jennifer, even though nearly 4 decades have passed. "You don't ever move on," he once said. "You just learn to live with it." And now, without the distraction of constant touring, that sadness feels closer than ever. The loss of his brother Buddy still lingers too. Friends say that as George grows older, family has become more important to him than anything else, but it has also become the source of his deepest emotional wounds. No matter how cherished his loved ones are, the people he lost can never return, and that weighs heavily on him. Professionally, the shifting landscape of country music has added an unexpected layer of emotional conflict. George never chased trends, he never switched his sound to fit in. But watching the genre transform into something far removed from his traditional style has been bittersweet. Fans insist he's still the king, but George has admitted that he sometimes feels like a man watching an era he helped build slip away. The industry he shaped now moves on without him, and that quiet reality has been difficult for him to fully accept. Then there is the fear every aging artist carries, the fear of being forgotten. Despite his success, despite his legacy, George Strait is human. He wonders what will remain after he's gone. Will younger generations know his music? Will his records still matter? Will the world remember the man he truly was, not just the superstar on stage, but the husband, father, and grieving parent behind the scenes? Yet the tragedy of George Strait is not that he is fading or broken. It is that he has carried so much pain, quietly, gracefully, without ever asking the world for sympathy. He kept touring when his heart was shattered. He kept singing when his spirit was heavy. He kept smiling when life dealt him blows most people could never endure. At 73, George Strait's story is a reminder that even legends bleed. Even icons grieve. And even the strongest hearts break in silence.